In another timeline, in another world, it's actually already underway. A military intervention in a North American nation of the likes that hasn't been seen in years. By rights, the Multinational Security Support Mission to Haiti, or MSS, should have begun at the end of May. Authorized by the UN Security Council in October 2023, the Kenyan-led expedition had been intended to start operations before the summer, to begin the dangerous work of dismantling the gangs that have brought the Caribbean nation to the brink of collapse. Indeed, as the end of spring approached, it looked like all the pieces were in place. After 3 months shuttered due to gang violence, the international airport at Port-au-Prince reopened on May the 20th, shortly after American soldiers were photographed on the tarmac guarding transport planes. By the 25th of May, 200 Kenyan police officials were reported to be in the country, preparing to lead an intervention that would be backed by forces from nations as varied as Jamaica, Chad, Bangladesh, and the Bahamas. Online speculation grew that the fighting would begin at any moment. And then, nothing. No pitched battles took place on the streets of the Haitian capital, no roads were seized, and no vital infrastructure was occupied. Instead, on Monday, May 27th, the Kenyan detachment boarded a plane and left Haiti. They left behind a failing state, plagued by insecurity and famine. They left behind hundreds of thousands trapped in Port-au-Prince as armed gangs cut off the exit roads. Not long after, President William Ruto confirmed what everyone had already guessed. The intervention would not be going ahead. Rather than begin their dangerous task at the end of May, the Kenyan-led force would now be waiting a minimum of 3 more weeks, until the second half of June. The reasons why were eminently reasonable. AP News reports that the American-built base the MSS was intended to operate out of was only 70% complete and lacking secure stores for the armory. CNN claims that the Kenyans were particularly concerned by a lack of helicopters for medical evacuations. Both of those are very good reasons to delay a deployment, especially one that will take place in a dense urban zone against an enemy with military-grade weapons. Still, it was hard to shake the feeling that the delay was a bad omen, that for all the good intentions, the upcoming intervention in Haiti may be morphing into a geopolitical nightmare. After all, this isn't the first time the deployment has been delayed. Kenyan police were originally supposed to arrive in March, only for President Ruto to hold back when an uprising forced Haiti's leader Ariel Henry to resign. Henry has since been replaced by a transitional presidential council, which on the 28th of May appointed a new interim prime minister, Gary Conille. But that hasn't stopped unease from spreading. Unease that the intervention may be seen as illegitimate by too many Haitians. Unease that the military deployments so far authorized might not be strong enough to defeat Haiti's increasingly powerful gangs. So, well, now seems like the ideal time to dig into what's happening with the MSS, to try and assess 2 things. 1, how likely is it to go ahead? And 2, the likelihood that it'll actually succeed. But before we can do that, we need to quickly fill in a little bit of background, both on what the MSS actually involves and how the situation in Haiti got so desperate in the first place. So let's start with the story of the MSS itself, since it's both easier to explain and, well, less relentlessly depressing. Although authorized in October of 2023, the Multinational Security Support Mission was first requested a year earlier in fall of 2022. That was when Ariel Henry and his cabinet begged the international community to send a military force into Haiti to quell the violence. At the time, the country's murder rate was extremely high, but not yet stratospheric. When we did our first in-depth video on the topic, we reported how 1,377 people had been killed between June and September of 2022 alone, which at the time felt like a crazy amount. Well, fast forward to 2024, and the estimated toll from the first 3 months of this year was a staggering 2,500. Unofficially, it's thought to be much higher. Médecins Sans Frontières did a pretty convincing study recently showing that Haiti's murder rate could be underreported by up to 70%. If true, that would mean Haiti's homicide rate is likely the highest in the Americas and up there with active war zones. Hence the need for the MSS. As agreed by the UN Security Council, the mission is meant to involve 2,500 police officers drawn from multiple nations who will help support the overwhelmed Haitian National Police in their fight against the gangs. Overall, 15 nations have pledged boots on the ground, nearly all of them either Caribbean or African. However, the 2 most important countries in the coalition, well, that would be Kenya and Jamaica. Operationally, CNN reports that the MSS will be headed by a Kenyan police commissioner and a Jamaican police lieutenant, with other top posts filled by Kenyan staff. Nairobi will also provide the bulk of the mission, with 1,000 Kenyan police being flown out to fight. If this sounds like a pretty major challenge for regular police officers, well, rest assured that there is nothing regular about the Kenyan force. Most of them are from the border police, which, given Kenya's neighbors, means that they've had experience battling terror groups like Somalia's Al-Shabaab. Once in Haiti, the new humanitarian informs us that the deployment will be split in two. According to the magazine, quoting here, half of the contingent will work to secure critical facilities and infrastructure, including the airport, while the rest will be tasked with combating the gangs that now control over 90% of Haiti's capital. To give them the equipment needed to achieve this, other nations are pitching in financially. The UN already has an MSS fund of $21 million made up of contributions from the United States, Canada, France, and Spain. On top of that, Ottawa has pledged an additional $80.5 million, while Uncle Sam has promised to cough up $300 million overall. The key point, though, is that neither America, nor Canada, nor any European partners will put boots on the ground beyond a possible skeleton staff for technical support. And that's because Haiti, a majority black nation, has a long history of interventions by outside powers that go so spectacularly wrong. American interventions in 1915, 1994, and 2004 all led to problems, while a Brazilian-led UN stabilization mission was dogged by allegations of abuse. Then in 2010, Nepalese peacekeepers accidentally introduced cholera, leading to an outbreak that killed thousands. As a result, the international community was eager for an intervention that would be free from any colonial overtones. Former Kenyan Foreign Minister Alfred Mutua said as much in 2023 when he declared of the MSS that Kenya stands with persons of African descent across the world. In reality, the reason for Nairobi's involvement, which is unpopular at home, may be more prosaic. In advance of the first Kenyan police arriving in Port-au-Prince, Joe Biden announced that Kenya would be designated a non-NATO ally of America, allowing it to buy more sophisticated US weapons. The final piece to get in place for the MSS was the buy-in of Haiti's political leaders. Although Ariel Henry had signed off on the intervention, his resignation in March threw everything back up in the air. Not that it stayed up in the air for very long, though. When the Transitional Council was being assembled to replace Henry, both the US and the regional CARICOM grouping made supporting the MSS a condition of joining. Although the council quickly collapsed into elite infighting, it did manage to appoint Prime Minister Gary Conille and sign off on the intervention. All right, so that's the story behind the Multinational Security Support Mission. Now for that oh so much grimmer part, the part where we sketch out why Haiti needs it in the first place. The short version is that the country has collapsed. Under the weight of elite dysfunction, the political crisis sparked by the 2021 assassination of President Jovenel Moise, and the growing power of armed gangs, Haiti's always fragile institutions have finally stopped working. The country is now fundamentally ungovernable without outside help. Gangs control 90% of the capital, Port-au-Prince, including former government buildings. The embattled Haitian National Police has retreated from most areas, leading to a wave of crime that unfolds on crowded streets in broad daylight. Here are some figures for you. As of March, 360,000 people inside Haiti were internally displaced, turned into refugees in their own country. According to the UN, murders were up 53% of their previous record high in 2023. As War on the Rocks wrote, quoting here, "In the first 2 months of 2024, a Haitian was murdered, injured, or kidnapped in gang-related violence every 40 minutes. The quote ends. So bad has the violence become, so random are the killings that bodies are left to rot in the streets. Gangs burn homes with impunity, and all this has a knock-on effect on other aspects of daily life. The power grid's collapsed, fuel for generators, long the main source of electricity for most of the capital, is just impossible to come by. Only 20% of Haiti's healthcare facilities are functional. Supply chains have been severed as gangs seize ports and key roads, leading to a situation where nearly 5 million people are going hungry, with 1.64 million on the cusp of famine. In the words of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, the country has become a living nightmare. In this carnival of horrors, the only people who are enjoying any kind of stability are the gangsters. And speaking of the gangs, one of the terrifying things about the last couple of years has been witnessing them grow in strength and sophistication. Originally created as paramilitary enforcers for Haiti's political and business elites, the gangs have wound up becoming more powerful than their masters. Videos on social media from just a year or so ago show members modeling themselves on the Los Angeles Crips, posing in front of expensive cars and flashing gang signs. Jump forward to 2024 though, and the videos feature khaki uniforms and military-grade weapons. According to Crisis Group, these weapons include, quote, AR-15s, AK-47s, Galils, 50 caliber sniper rifles, and belt-fed machine guns. Those are serious pieces of kit, as is the Belgian-designed FN FAL rifle that some gang members are toting. Justice Department officials recently told the New York Times that Haiti's gangs now have an arsenal more powerful than any they have ever possessed before. And the source of these guns is also worrying. Many appear to have been handed on by Colombia's Gulf Clan cartel, who in turn seem to have stolen them from the state. Colombian President Gustavo Petro recently declared that at least 2 military warehouses in the country had been looted, with everything from bullets to grenades to high-powered rifles being stolen. This stockpile likely makes the gangs a far more potent threat than they were when the MSS was authorized in the fall of 2023. Yet the key problem with the gangs, whose members are thought to total around 5,000, isn't the weapons they wield, but the fact they're working together. Across 2022 and 2023, the surge in gang violence was thought to be in part attributable to warfare between Port-au-Prince's two major coalitions, G9 and GPEP. This February, though, the two coalitions joined forces, merging into a single entity known as Vivre Ensemble, or Live Together in English. Rather than decrease the number of murders, it appears to have turbocharged them. Originally, the gangs teamed up to force Ariel Henry's resignation. Now, though, their goal seems to be either discourage or defeat an armed intervention. With their combined might, the armed groups have managed to launch devastating attacks on critical infrastructure, government buildings, and police stations. The last part's key, because it shows what appears to be part of the gang's plan to counter the MSS, causing such devastation to the Haitian National Police that it's incapable of providing the mission any support. The Globe and Mail has documented increasingly gruesome attacks on Haiti's cops. In the town of Gracier, 2 cops were recently burned alive in their patrol car. In Croix-de-Bugey, gang members commandeered bulldozers to literally tear down a police station. Signs are that these concerted attacks are working. Across 2023, it's estimated that over 2,000 officers deserted from a total police force of only 9,000. Now, if you've watched our previous Haiti videos, you'll know that we've often compared that figure of 9,000 officers for the whole of Haiti with the 36,000 cops in New York City alone. But recent research suggests the figures are even more dire than we realize. Insight Crime interviewed senior fellow at the Brookings Institute and security expert Vander Fulbar Brown, who claims the actual number of officers remaining in Haiti is closer to a mere 3,000. That would be an insufficient number, even if Haiti's 11.5 million citizens were living in a crime-free utopia. Here in the Czech Republic, for example, a country of fewer than 11 million that often ranks among the safest in Europe, there are over 13 times as many police officers. We'll get on to what the weakness of the HNP means for the intervention in a moment, but just to wrap up this section, we should quickly talk about the gang's growing geographic reach. For a long time, the horrors of gang predations in Haiti were mostly confined to Port-au-Prince, and even then, mostly to the city's sprawling slums. Over 2023, though, the gangs expanded their reach, first into the government districts, and then up into the luxurious hillside suburbs where Haiti's upper middle class long lived in relatively crime-free oases. Unfortunately, they didn't stop there. The last 9 months or so have seen them expand beyond the capital. Key roads out in the countryside are now under gang control, as are some strategically placed police stations. But the real problem is increasing gang activity in Artibonite department. Known as Haiti's breadbasket, Artibonite is where most of the nation's food is grown. As violence starts to consume the department, more and more farmers are fleeing, exacerbating what is already an acute hunger crisis. This then is the situation the MSS force will be stepping into, one in which 2,500 international police officers, backed by perhaps 3,000 Haitian police, are expected to pacify Port-au-Prince. This would be bad enough even if the remaining HMP officers were paragons of virtue, but the reality is the HMP is deeply corrupt, with scores of cops already on the gang's payroll. It's no accident that Haiti's most infamous gang leader, Jimmy Cherizier, better known as Barbecue, is himself a former policeman. Beyond the problems with corruption, there are also questions about how effectively the HNP's officers will be able to work with the MSS. As the local police union pointed out in a written statement to international journalists earlier this year, we don't even know how we will communicate with the Kenyan police officers who speak English. We speak French and Creole in Haiti. To be clear, this isn't to say that there aren't any brave, effective cops still working in Haiti. God knows it must take balls of iron to keep working under the threat of murder by psychopathic gangsters. We can only admire anyone who does that. No, the issue isn't whether there are any good cops left in Haiti, but whether there are enough of them to effectively support the MSS. The entire plan, after all, operates on the assumption that the Kenyan-led deployment will be backing up the HNP rather than completely taking over its functions. And speaking of the Kenyan force, different observers have wildly different opinions on their chance of success. Let's start off with the side that thinks they'll be unable to counter the growing might of the gangs. Inside Crime notes that the MSS isn't authorized to go in all guns blazing. Rather, the mission outline allows for only 200 officers to be sent to Haiti at a time, meaning it will take a while for the MSS to reach its full strength. And that's problematic, because Crisis Group predicts that the gangs will try to attack the MSS as soon as it is deployed. In their words, once on the ground, the mission will likely have its hands full immediately, as it may have to respond to coordinated attacks from Viv and Sam. Quote ends. We can see the likelihood of this just by looking at the current gang actions. The cocaine trafficking mafia of Five Saigon, which seems to have links to Colombia's cartels, has made attacking hard targets like government installations part of its USP. If the MSS is not yet fully deployed when these attacks begin, it's hard to say whether the Kenyan-led force will be able to neutralize them. But even at full strength, it's unclear if the deployment will have sufficient firepower to solve Haiti's crisis. Speaking to Inside Crime, Dan Foote, former United States Special Envoy to Haiti, noted that 2,500 guys don't stretch thick going into a situation where gangs have all kinds of heavy weaponry. With 2,500 guys, it's ridiculous. Now, this is the pessimistic view of the MSS, one which predicts that the Kenyan-led force will be quickly overwhelmed and that support for it will collapse once Kenyan boys start coming home in body bags. However, this isn't the only possible outcome. Others are far more bullish on the mission's chance of success, something they base on the gang's lack of serious fighting experience. While gang members currently dress like paramilitaries, the reality is that these are not soldiers. The UN estimates that 30 to 50% of Haiti's gangsters are children or teenagers. This means that they are totally unprepared to face a well-trained, well-armed, experienced fighting force. And remember that the Kenyan border guards have previously fought brutal terror groups like Al-Shabaab. This is why the executive director of the National Network for the Defense of Human Rights, Pierre Esperance, told the Globe and Mail that he believes the, quote, poorly trained gang members would be no match for a quasi-military force. The UN's top expert on Haiti, William O'Neill, has even been more confident, telling The Guardian that, quote, many of the young gang combatants who have been sowing terror in Port-au-Prince would stand down once a superior fighting force arrived. In his telling, the only thing that Haiti's gangs respect is force, so a demonstration of strength from the MSS shortly after it arrives might be enough to convince them to put down their weapons and melt back into the civilian population. This is why some are suggesting the Transitional Presidential Council should create off-ramps for rank-and-file gangsters, announcing lenient sentences for those who willingly turn themselves in or otherwise put down arms. Yet, even if the gangsters really do crumble in the face of superior training and firepower, that still doesn't mean that Haiti's problems will be solved. The trouble, as we alluded to earlier, isn't just that Haiti's gangs are powerful, it's that they were created and funded by the nation's elites. Politicians and business leaders have all been implicated in using the gangs to create pressure on the streets or destroy rivals' businesses. In other words, Haitian upper society is run by criminals who helped fuel the gangs' rise. A parasitic class that cynically tried to use the forces now tearing the country to shreds and would likely continue to do so even after a successful intervention. Until the elites are cleaned out, there seems little hope for any long-term fix to Haiti's problems. But how you'd actually do that is another matter entirely. Although the Transitional Council has a mandate to organize elections by early 2026, it's hard to see what problems these might fix. Assuming the MSS is successful in stopping the violence, it's not like the elites aren't already pros at rigging votes. In the past, politicians have used gangs to drive up turnout or force everyone living in a certain area to vote a certain way. The chances they won't do so again are incredibly remote. As a result, it's entirely possible that the MSS might solve the current crisis without doing anything to prevent another one a few years down the line. That the Kenyan-led force might succeed in occupying strategic locations and key roads, let aid in and preside over elections, only for the gangs to come back out of the woodwork once they leave. This is why many within Haiti are calling for a Haitian-led solution to the current troubles, one that focuses on root and branch political reform in the hope that the longer-term problems can be solved. Sadly, it's not clear that any of the groups advocating for this actually have the stamina or political clout to pull it off. So, that's where things stand on the eve of the multinational security support mission to Haiti, with a whole load of questions swirling around its readiness, its capabilities, and the potential for this to become anything but a military quagmire. Yet another occupation in Haiti's long list of outside interventions. Interventions that, so far, have yet to succeed in turning Haiti's fortunes around. On the other hand, what other choice does the international community have? Haiti's collapse has already seen the country turn into a key base for smuggling cocaine and weapons. Refugees are already trying to cross into the US in record numbers. Should the world just sit back and let Haiti become a North American Somalia, a source of chronic instability and violence that destabilizes an entire region? Now look, these aren't easy questions to answer. Going in gung-ho comes with great potential for disaster. But then, a disaster's already underway. Should we just sit back and let it happen? For now, the only answer is to wait and see what the Kenyan-led mission can achieve. Whether it lives up to the lofty promises of President Ruto, or whether it crumples in the face of its multitude of challenges. The only certainty is that poor Haiti will remain in the headlines for a long time to come, a state let down by its own awful elite, an elite that has doomed its citizens to a life of unimaginable horror at the hands of predatory gangs.